Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Life's Black Belts. As always, I am your host, Eric Alders, and it is my goal to bring in front of you not only people that have experience and have excelled in levels of business, but also, more importantly, who they are in life. It's not a martial arts podcast, even though it has the word black belt in it, but what that represents is more along the lines of the journey that it takes for you to travel up through the ranks, the adversity that you have to overcome, all the different lessons that you learn throughout, especially the perseverance that it takes to get to those higher levels. And then when you do reach that black belt level, you do find out that basically you're only at the beginning and that the journey of learning never ends and is ongoing. And such is for life as well. And some of the guests that we have on the show that I have had on in the past and will continue to have on in the future have a variety of different experiences and backgrounds. And so does today's Life's Black Belt. Today I'm going to be joined by a very good friend of mine. His name is Luis Fuentes. He's a regional business manager of Phillips Healthcare. And the reason I'm going to bring Luis on is, as I mentioned, we're good friends, so I know that he has a very interesting story. He's a good friend. He's an amazing father and husband and a hardworking man. And I love to highlight people in life that also inspire me as well. And in my hopes is through his story and hearing his journey, you might find some inspiration in your life as well. So without any further ado, let's welcome today's Life's Black Belt guest, Mr. Luis Fuentes. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, man. That was a really nice introduction.
I do the best that I can, sir. You gotta, make everyone believe that you're actually a knowledgeable man. I'm just kidding. No, you're. Love to have fun on these events, and we're doing this one in person, face to face, which I do a lot. With interviews of people all over the country and the world, and it's great. And a lot of those people I don't know. I have a little bit of a bio on them, and then we just start talking. This is different because, and I've had guests on, like my brother and my father and other people that are close to me, where I know a little bit more of your story. But no matter how long I know you for, I always find that through this interview process, I learn things about you I never knew before. And it's something that I want to encourage people by, to sit down and not only get to meet new people, but to maybe have more in-depth conversations with people that are around us to learn about them, their life, their story, their struggles. We're all always focused on what's happening in our life. We don't realize that everyone we encounter has their own story. And I feel like when you have the opportunity to learn from one another, it helps us all to grow, as opposed to the, hey, Lewis, how are you? Oh, I'm good. Are you really? Are you really good? If you're stopping, be like, well, let me tell you about my day at work today. My wife said to me, if someone actually stopped and told you what they were actually feeling, you'd probably be shocked. It's more of like, I'm just going to wave, say hello, how are you? Great, good to see you. And it's kind of phony. And one of the main things for me is like, hey, everyone, let's put our phones down, sit down, and just, stare face to face and enjoy a nice conversation together. So that's what this is all about. What I like to start with is to kind of pre-frame a little bit. We know, like, fast forward, you're a husband, you're a father, you're a regional business manager for a major health company. But I want to know more about who you are. So if you wouldn't mind taking us back a little bit and give me a little bit of a background on, like, where you grew up and what life was like for you as a child.
Sure. So my family came to the U.S. In the late 70s from Puerto Rico, and they moved into New York City. My memories really take me back to the Bronx, New York, where I was born. And, the funny thing is, one of the stories my mother tells me is we lived in the Bronx in the era of Son of Sam. I don't know if you have ever heard of Son of Sam, but pretty scary stuff, pretty intimidating stuff, horrific. And my mother had a goal to get us out of there. To get me out of there specifically, and my father. And she was a pioneer. So we left the Bronx after I was about 4 years old and moved into New Jersey. We moved to Union Beach, New Jersey, where we lived with my grandmother for about 6 months or so. And then when I went to kindergarten, I went to Keyport. We moved to Keyport. We lived in an apartment. And I grew up in Keyport, New Jersey, a small town, 1 square mile. You hear of a small town and you think, what goes on in a small town? Not much to do, but it was full of life and really good people and a lot of great learning lessons, on all scales, from, low income to people that had a great, let's say, great businesses, great careers, things like that. So you really saw the full spectrum of life in this small little 1 square mile town.
Now, did your parents ever tell you why, growing up in Puerto Rico, they decided to move to the U.S. in the 70s? Like, what motivated them to leave the country?
I think it was more about, expanding their horizons, looking for not so much a better life. I know stories about my grandfather he was a pretty strict individual. When we talk about my grandfather, rest in peace, he was really someone that was very disciplined and ruled with a heavy hand in a sense. And I think at some point you want to grow. I think my mother wanted to grow. I think it was the same for my father as well. They wanted to get off the island and really explore. They actually met here in the States, though, not in Puerto Rico. So they both met when they both lived in New York City, and that's where it all started for them. But I think it was more about just expanding, the capabilities of what they could do in their life and their careers, things like that.
Okay. And then were you an only child at that time, or did you have any siblings?
I was an only child. I have a brother. We're 9 years apart. So by today's standards, that's a long time. But and at birthday parties, it's always a joke that I'm the older brother. But that's a whole nother story. He was when he was born, I always wanted a little brother, and I was very fortunate that even 9 years later, that my mother was able to have a healthy birth of another boy. And I always said that was my first wish come true, was knowing that I got a little brother when I wanted one.
And then, 9 years apart, it's a pretty big difference. Were you guys close growing up?
Oh, absolutely. So, living in Keyport, had its challenges. My family was very blue collar. My father worked for Silverton Boatyard. He was a machinist. He was a fabricator. So he would come home with, it's very vivid in my mind, the smell of the resin of fiberglass, and the fiberglass that was on his boots and clothes. And he would always come home just reeking of these chemicals, which probably was not very healthy for him. But, he did a lot of fabrication. My mother worked in a factory called Charles of the Ritz. It was, back then, was a big perfume company. It used to make scents like Gina Tay. I don't know if you're old enough to remember things like Gina Tay and Opium. Those were, kind of big hits back in the late 70s, early 80s. But yeah, very, very middle class, very blue collar. And I forgot what your question was.
No, I was just saying that it was talking about how close you and your brother were because of how far apart you were in age growing up and close.
Right. So he, them working as much as they did, by the time I got a little brother, it was like a toy. Like I had this new friend, and I just wanted to really expose him to anything and everything. I to this day, I say that I taught him how to, add and subtract, his ABCs. Like, I wanted to help him learn as much as possible. And I want to protect him too. I mean, I'm a very protective brother. It may not seem like that when we're together, but I'm very protective of him and my family in general, and friends. That's just my personality.
Right. Now, you said you guys were in the Bronx. Now, what motivated you guys to move to Keyport?
So the big motivation for my mother, as she tells the story, is really just fear of, crime and just where it was going. We lived in a nice neighborhood. I think it was a predominantly Jewish community in that neighborhood, but I think things started getting a little bit worse in a sense, a little bit more poverty, a little more crime. And her foresight was really to just get us out and say, I want to try to give my child a better life. And how do I do that? Where do we go? So she followed my grandmother and came out to Jersey. And, again, we moved to an area that wasn't that way. It was, again, blue collar. There was that big spectrum. But at the end of the day, it was a great decision. I always tell her jokingly, not even jokingly, but I tell her it was a lifesaver. Because who knows? You never know who's going to be your influencer when you're growing up. Maybe I get involved with the wrong person, or I do something wrong, or it just, you don't know what you get exposed to, whether you're good, bad, or indifferent. There's influencers out there that could send you the wrong way.
for sure, man. But when you're, growing up and you're moving around already as a young man, and both of your parents are hard workers, it sounds like, what was that relationship like while going to school? Were they around a lot? Like, or do they work opposite hours? I know usually when you have two, members of the family, both parents that are working, sometimes one parent has to work late at night, one in the morning to take care of the kids. What was the situation like for you? As hard workers as they were to provide this life for you and your brother, were they actively around a lot while you were growing up and going to school?
Yeah, so the way it worked is they had two shifts, so pretty much exactly what you're saying. So my mother worked night shift, my father worked day shift. So he would work day shift at the boatyard. From what I can recall, I think there were some night shift there, and obviously, we had babysitters and that type of network. The network then was very different. It wasn't let me text message a babysitter or a service. It was let's walk down to the lady a few apartments down that we know very well that can stay with us for the night. But yeah, it was alternating shifts. So you got a little bit of each one, not as much as you always want to, but I think we deal with those same struggles as parents now, right? Mm-hmm. We try
Absolutely.
to balance, a work-life balance with making sure we can be successful and have continuity in our careers to be able to provide for them, but at the same time not sacrifice what we're trying to do for our children. So it's tough. I mean, when you're in the thick of it, it's a very different perspective than when you're a little kid.
Of course. Well, when you're a kid, you just want your parents around all the time, and you want to have fun. You don't think about what food costs and paying rents. And then you get older and you look back and you're like, well, thank you. You taught me pretty much everything that I know, and you fed me and took care of me, and it's not easy.
Right.
And life's challenging. What about for you? Going to school as a young man, through teen years and all of that, was life, no big deal, got through school, did well in school. Was it a tough neighborhood that you were in? What was the overall experience through your youth like for you?
No, I wouldn't say a tough neighborhood. I mean, again, I think going back to seeing that broad spectrum where we lived in a very nice apartment complex. I lived right across the street from the school. So it was always a joke when I got to high school, I used to drive to school and it was literally right across the street. But the reason I did that was because I used to leave school early in senior year, and I was in a co-op program where I could leave and go work and still earn credits because I had enough credits that I didn't need to take extra courses. So I figured, hey, why not earn some money to do that? So that was always kind of a standing joke. But in elementary school, I mean, it was a great school. I have great memories of friends from kindergarten, all the way up through senior year in high school. I mean, I have to say, I do have early memories of maybe, just being introduced into kindergarten and, being Puerto Rican in a predominantly white, school. But I don't remember that being an issue, really, from the children so much. I mean, later in years, there were some times where some people kind of, and you're going to find that, I think, anywhere. But as far as kids went, I think they were great. They all really helped me become who I am in their own way.
Yeah, but one thing I like to always, touch upon, because I've interviewed a variety of people from different backgrounds, and sometimes I've interviewed people that have Indian backgrounds and Asian backgrounds and everything in between. And sometimes they find that being around a community of people that are different than them sometimes makes no difference at all. And then other people, it's a huge part of their life. But you're saying early on as a young man that being Puerto Rican in a mostly white school or neighborhood didn't really have any sort of impact. Was there a point in your life at all that made you feel as though like, oh, I'm a little bit different than these people? Or was it such an eclectic type of a neighborhood where there's maybe not some white people, but there's a mix of other races that are there that it was really no big deal for you? Like, did it play a major role in your life with a Puerto Rican background, or it was really not even something to think about?
Well, I think from the perspective of being a child, the beauty of being a child is you're not really even thinking about that. You're just absorbing the goodness around you and the experiences, and they're not all perfect, but children just kind of adapt, right? And that's the beauty. And then I always say we're the ones that influence our children, right? One way or another. So some good, some bad, depends on your perspective in life. but I don't ever recall that being an issue. The first memory I ever recall of having some sort of, or actually feeling that kind of gut wrenching punch in the stomach that you're different, was in Sandy Hook. We used to go to a place called Sandy Hook, to the beach. That was a place we loved to go and just spend a day and, hang out, do all the sandcastle thing, and go swimming and all that. And I remember playing with this one young boy, probably same age as me, and I think by the tail end of the day, just by conversation, it just came out like, "Hey, what are you?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he says, "What are you? Are you this? Are you that?" And I said, "Well, we're Puerto Rican." And I'll never forget, he says, "Oh, I'm not allowed to play with you." And literally kind of like walked away. That was kind of like, wait, what just happened?
Yeah, like, what do you
It
mean?
was kind of like, well, what do you mean? Like, you have to leave? You're going home? But it was more, that was kind of like my first dose of saying that somehow there's something that someone says, if you're this or that you may not fit in someone else's sandbox, let's say, which was weird. It was a weird scenario.
It's a shame that exists at all, but I have memories of that growing up. I was like raised as a Reformed Jewish guy, so laid back, but I remember having people move in across the street from us from like South Carolina, and we were playing, and then I remember at one point the boys, that we played with across the street found out that we were Jewish, and then the one kid starts rubbing the back of my head, and I'm like, "What are you doing, man?" He's like, "Oh, I'm looking for your horns." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, the Jewish people are from the devil. So my mom and dad said that, that you guys have horns." And I'm like, "I've never heard of it. I never even heard of this in my life as a kid." And I went to my parents and like, "Yeah, there's some people that have these weird stereotypes, and you don't think you're any different, because like I'm not walking around with a yarmulke on or anything like that." But again, having people at school sometimes, I had a kid that threw a penny down the hallway and is like, "Go pick it up, Jew." Right. I was a little hot-tempered as a kid, so he might have gotten punched a few times. I might have been in the principal's office afterwards. But
right.
You start to realize there's just some ignorant people that are out there, and you have to kind of rise above all of that. As a young man, you said you're going to school and getting some extra credits so that you can go to work. What was your goal, if you think back then, of what you wanted to be when you grew up and came into your own?
So I always had this dream that I was going to be a surgeon.
Okay.
That was always what, as long as I can remember. Actually, the only thing I remember prior to that was I had an uncle that drove a bus in New York City when we lived in New York City. And I remember getting on the bus while he was driving. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world that he's driving that big giant bus. And I was like, that's what I want to do. That was the first thing I can recall. But really, the first career I thought I wanted to do was be something in medicine. I wanted to be a physician. I wanted to be specifically a surgeon as I kind of got older.
What drew you towards the medical field?
I think there was an interest in just helping people, this innate curiosity of how the body works, and seeing that someone could care for a person and help their health. And there was just this kind of respect for a physician. And maybe it came from, being a child. I was a sickly child, to be honest. I had something called rheumatic fever that my mother always tells me about. I used to have a lot of convulsions. Back then in the 70s, they didn't treat things the way they would now. Like if you had a fever of 105 and you're about to have seizures, they would tell you, take the baby outside in a diaper in the winter to try to get the fever down. Or if you got to the hospital, they'd put you like in this straight up ice bath to try to get that core temperature down. So a little different, but I don't know, maybe it was just seeing how I was treated as a child, or the attention I got, and the importance of that just resonated to me somehow, I think.
Right.
So yeah.
So what'd you do outside of high school? Did you go right into college? What was your next step?
So after high school, I went to college and I decided to go into a radiology program, and I totally failed miserably the entrance exam, which was devastating because admittedly I'm not a great test taker. The way my brain works, it's not very black and white. It's very I'm left-handed, which they tell people, left-handed people are very creative. And so for me, taking a test, you put something that's, answer it this way. And I'm kind of like already kind of building other ways it could be answered. So that was always a bit of a struggle, and it showed on that entrance exam. So I took that on the chin, and I'm like, oh boy, didn't get that. What am I going to do? Because I don't want to, work in, McDonald's or some restaurant for the rest of my life. So then I started in a community college. I got into a respiratory therapy program, which was very interesting to me because it was very clinical. It was very technical because it was all life support equipment and all kinds of therapies involved in treating people with cardiopulmonary disease. And I fell in love with it. I totally was head first, and I remember studying late hours in my mother's basement for exams and practical exams, because you have a didactic session where you learn what's in the book, then you have a practical session where you go into an actual lab and they see if you have the ability or the competency to understand what you're supposed to do and then actually do it on a dummy, or let's just say a mannequin, not a dummy, but and then they take you to the clinical, which is actually on actual people. So, but yeah, I fell in love with that. So I gravitated to that, and that was my first step into the medical field, which was just a phenomenal experience.
So did you feel that you were where you belonged at that point?
I did. I felt so in my mind, I'll just admit, one of the things that drives me is that I always think of what I should have done, and I always wanted to be that surgeon. I think that energy translates into what I'm motivated to do even today. So even though, look, I know I'm not going to be a surgeon. That's total, and I'm good with that. But my drive to be the absolute best I can be shows. And I mean, if you know me and you play something simple like a basketball game with me, because I love basketball, I want to win. I want to win every time. It'll start out fun, but it'll get competitive.
Right, you're competitive in nature.
Right, absolutely.
Right, which is a good and a bad thing, but you need competitiveness to push yourself, even being competitive with yourself, not just with others, and trying to push yourself to be better than you were, than the week before. But so going through this field now, and you're are you living on your own at this point, or are you in a relationship at this point? Where are you at? You're working in a job. You feel like you're where you're supposed to be. Life seems like it's on kind of track of where your goals were. You had one idea at first. It didn't work out for you. You found a new path. What's next in the journey for you?
So what I did was I started as I graduated through that program and started networking with people. So one thing, and I kind of attribute this quality probably more to my father. My father was a very people loved him, like out in the open, he could be in a public place and he just, people lit up. He probably should have been a salesperson, because he just had that people personality, and people just gravitated to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I started networking before I graduated. I actually landed a job. I wanted to work in one of the tougher hospitals in the area. So toughest hospital that at the time to work at, or at least the reputation was to work at Robert Wood Johnson in New Brunswick, right? So it's a trauma facility. They do open heart surgery there. It's you'll see everything. There's a lot of urban area there, shootings, gang, you wanted that experience, and that's what I went to. So I landed a job there, and I ended up working there 15 years, I want to say, and kind of moved up the ladder throughout those 15 years, and then ended up in industry, and that's a kind of a whole another story.
Sure.
So
let's rewind back a little bit, because I believe that somewhere in that 15-year period, you met your future wife. Is that correct?
I did.
So
Yeah.
can you tell me a little bit about that? And be careful, sir. This is being recorded.
Yeah, I know. I'm just going to tell the story I tell everybody else.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me the story.
So the first time I saw her was in the emergency room, and she was working as I think it was a critical care tech, which was kind of like a nurse assistant at a time. She was in college. I don't think she was a nurse yet. I'm not really sure because I didn't know her, but I know when I saw her and the way she was kind of walking towards me, I'm like, I need to know who that is. And she had this swagger about her. I mean, I can't walk and show you what it looked like, and
It's
I
okay.
wouldn't.
I'm sure you would look good.
I wouldn't do it any justice anyway. But she walked right past me, and I tried to make eye contact with her, and she didn't give me the time of day. So I was just like, oh, okay, well, I guess time to move on. I think a couple of years later, it was a few years, but she ended up coming and working in the trauma unit, which is where I used to work as the respiratory therapist. So I used to do trauma and I used to do open heart surgery. I kind of bounced back and forth between the two. She started working down there, and that's actually how we met. And she was very quiet in the beginning. I mean, like most people do, she was shy, didn't talk a lot, just was really focused on her craft, which she was really, really good at. And one day we said hello to each other, and she'll tell you to this day, she'll go, I was so cheesy. I said, oh, so you do talk? And she's like, oh, that was such a line. And it really wasn't a line. I was just trying to,
Get the conversation going.
break the ice, right? So there was a group of us that were same age. We worked the evening shift, and we started hanging out afterwards. We'd go to a local bar, talk about the day, have a cocktail or something, and that's how our friendship started. It started really more as a friendship, and I'll remember distinctly in our friendship, she was gone for a couple of days, and when she had come back to work, she told me she was in a car accident, and she actually, so we used to wear scrubs, as nurses and respiratory therapists, but she had like all this bruising from the seatbelt around her neck, and I'll never forget, like I saw the bruising, and it just, I don't know if it was like, if you can call it like a rush, like it just gave me this like, why am I feeling this way? Like I felt so bad, but at the same time I felt compelled, like I don't want her to be hurt like that, So it was a little strange for me, and I'm like, what's going on here? Like, do I like this girl? Like, what's the deal? And yeah, it morphed into something wonderful. Like, we've been together for 17 years. The beauty of our relationship was no one knew that we were together in the hospital, because neither one of us wanted the so-called general hospital drama.
Right.
And we ended up getting engaged after 3 months. That's how, I just knew she was the one for me. And everyone was shocked. It was just the best thing to see when she came in with an engagement ring, and they're like, oh my God, who'd you? And she goes, that guy right there. And they're all looking at me, and they're like, yeah, whatever. They're calling BS. And she goes, no, that's the guy. And here we are, 17 years
3
later.
months and engaged.
Yeah,
I waited a year, and people thought that was quick. 3 months is pretty fast.
Listen, she was the first woman I've ever met that made me feel that she didn't see anything but who I was, the content of me, which, we develop over time. I had a lot of flaws, and I had a pretty bad temper back then. Who doesn't when you're young? You go to the gym, you work out, you think, she just saw past every flaw and just saw something better in me that I hadn't seen yet. And I probably never said this to her, but I think a lot of that, she gave me so much confidence in that I think it kind of led me to further successes in career and comfort within myself that I didn't really have myself, at that age when we met.
So when you're looking back now, 17 years later, and you think about, maybe that competitive nature, and you found the girl, and you're like, wait, I like this girl, there's something there. Bam, I'm going to take her, I'm going to make her mine, and things obviously work out for you. But I know one thing for myself and a lot of other people is that when, marriage is one step, but when children come into the mix, it makes things even more challenging. So what was it like for you when you found out that next stage in your life was coming up? I know there's a lot of people that listen that are, experienced parents, some that are pretty new, and it could be a very scary thing of, are we ready? Do we have enough money? Are we established? And so on. So what was that experience like for you becoming a father?
It was both exciting because I never thought, number one, I never thought I'd be married. It's just the way you grow up, the trials, the tribulations, the struggles, I think my mentality was, and I remember speaking to my mother about it. I said, Mom, I don't know that I'm ever going to meet the right person. I was in my like 27, 28, and it was right before I met Kristen. And I said, I'm sorry, I just don't think I'll get married. I don't think you're going to have grandchildren. And I struggled with that. That was a big struggle then. So to have that, to meet someone, to then get married, and now have a child on the way, to me, it was kind of like a miracle to me. It was, I felt very fortunate. I still feel fortunate.
What was it, though, that made you feel that you wouldn't have that? Was it because you were 27 and 28 and society says you should have someone by now? Or was it, relationships of the past that just didn't quite work out well? Or were you putting pressure on yourself that, was it something that a characteristic that you had that wasn't able to, find the right person? What was it at 27 or 28 where you had to have a conversation with your mom thinking that you might be alone for the rest of your life?
I think so. Probably a couple milestones. When I was in college, probably the most tragic thing I dealt with when I was in college was the loss of my best friend. That was extremely unfortunate for me. I still struggle with it to this day. Every time it's January 16th, it's always a very rough time for me. But that was hard, and that was one of many building blocks. So I will say, the loss of my best friend, the loss of my father when he was 42. We didn't get into the discussion about that, but he fell ill due to alcoholism and things like that. That was a struggle for him. So those type of things, I think, set my mentality in a state like, you think you want things to be good, but are you ever really sure that they are going to be good? And that was kind of where I was at before I met my wife and realized that there are good things out there. You just have to shift your perspective, and there are people out there that can help you shift that perspective. You just have to really trust that, where they're trying to take you is actually a good path. Right. So until I did that, I really wasn't seeing what was in front of me.
Death will do that to a lot of people. It brings perspective and lets you know what's really important in life and what's not. Now, you mentioned, to rewind, we were just talking about, your marriage and having kids, but you brought up some things we have to touch back on. So was your father an alcoholic for the majority of your life, or that something that came in later? Because, you said it eventually took his life. So yeah, what was that experience like for you?
Well, as long as I can remember, I don't know. I don't remember the younger years, how much drinking was an issue for him, but I remember definitely like 7, 8 years old, and probably up until 14. I was around 14. I think my parents got divorced. And I hadn't seen him until I found out he passed away when I was 18. So the last time I saw him, he was 14. I was 14, I'm sorry. And then I found out through my uncle, who recently just passed, that he had passed away, and it was pretty upsetting because I just graduated high school. My mother had already known, but was so kind of worried about me finding out and how she was going to tell me, and I don't hold this against her, and I didn't hold it against her then either, because I couldn't imagine that pressure and worrying that your son is going to go off the deep end, because she knew my plan was, I'm going to go to him, I'm going to show him that I'm graduating high school, I'm going to college, I'm going to make something of myself, and hopefully maybe mend that relationship. But he had already been gone for like 6 months, so that was
it's got to be tough, especially when you have no opportunity to reconcile,
right?
Or get to know him as a man. You know what I mean?
Well, the opportunity, what it did for me was it really made me step back and go from being kind of an angry, protective young man of his mother, who was a single mom, to try to understand his life as a man and what his trials and tribulations were that led him to where he was. So really, it helped me gain perspective that I didn't have before. And you could probably attest to this, what you think and you see when you're younger is very different than when you're older and you can reflect back. Mm-hmm. And that really made me get introspective about his life and say, okay, so if I went through the things he went through, which was a tough childhood, would I be able to be who I am right now? And I don't know that I could, which really, so I kind of had this, I'll just use the word virtual. I created this virtual relationship with him when he passed on to kind of say, I'm going to dedicate myself to really understanding why you went down that path and what, how difficult of a struggle it was for you. And it really helped me a lot because it really made me understand that, that type of adversity that he went through was not something a lot of people could deal with.
Well, you also have the life perspective to look back on it now. I'm sure during the time it's tough and it's challenging, but I'm sure you could look back and say that this impacted the kind of father that you wanted to be. You know what I mean? I could imagine, obviously, not putting words in your mouth, that you didn't want to put your children in the same situation that at 18 years old their dad's gone or had fallen to alcoholism. And it happens to some of the best friends that we know in this world that have life's pressures and stresses, and some people are able to navigate that, and some people have a very hard time and get very depressed, and they fall on alcohol or whatever vice it may be, and some escape it, and unfortunately in your dad's situation he didn't. But at least I think you'd reflect back at least it contributed to your life in a positive way as much as it could. You could have gone down a different road and gotten very angry, very depressed, very violent. You said you had a temper. We didn't even go into that, but you said you had a temper as a young man that could have taken you down a completely different path, losing your dad at such a young age. And the fact that you were able to still kind of get through that, these are those moments that we talk about on the podcast, of these moments where life just stops and hits you in the face. And I imagine the same for your best friend that passed. And I have that connection with you as well. Like, I literally... sitting here on my desk, I have a picture of my best friend sitting here, and up here I look at every day at the dojo because we had a dream of doing this. We had a dream of opening a school together. So when I get caught up in life and stress, and even though it's a job that I love, it's still work. And when you lose sight of that, sometimes I have an opportunity to look over and go, well, that's what I'm fulfilling our dream, and I'm alive, and I'm able to do this. So I have to keep that going. You know what I mean? I would imagine, losing a best friend. Still, you're talking about this as an older man now, looking back on it. This happened to you at a younger age. How old were you when your friend passed?
I want to say I was 22.
Okay. Yeah, I was right around the same age.
20, when you're 46, I recently turned 46, so you get a little foggy with,
No, but I mean, you have a rough idea,
like
and some people think that 20-something years later it may not have such an impact. And there's times I could think and talk about them, like right now, and I'm not in tears. There's other times a song could come on, or I could start saying 3 words of a story, and it hits you out of nowhere. But it's these certain people, that enter our lives and leave these lasting impacts for a reason. Like, my friend Bob and your friend that had an opportunity to enter our life and influence us, even at such a young age, to be in our 40s now, and to look back and still realize that this person had such a deep impact, also kind of lets you reflect on the impact that we have on others around us, and how we can contribute to other people's lives in ways that we may not even realize.
Yeah. Definitely, and so I'll just tell you, his name's Sharif Arnold. I mean, I love him to death, and his brother and I are still best of friends. His brother lives in Atlanta. We get to see, he travels up here to visit his mother a couple times a year, so we try to get together. But we were friends probably since we were 6 or 7 years old. So that was first, major kind of tragedy that you deal with, and coping with that. And again, when I spoke to his mother recently, it's tough. It's still tough to this day for me personally, because I remember seeing him the night before he passed, and I always hold a little bit of guilt that I was not able to help him more. So he was he was a suicide victim,
right?
So it was tough, and I held that guilt, like I could not save my best friend from doing that. I could not compel him, and that was, I take that as almost like my biggest personal failure, which has morphed into, how do I do things better in life? How do I recognize that in different ways to help pay it forward?
Yeah. Well, it's super challenging to not put guilt on yourself. You know what I mean? Like, he moved away to Georgia because his dad's in the military and kept inviting me down for 2 years to come visit him. But I was in school and I had this excuse and that excuse of why I can't hop on a plane and go see you. Calls me up a day or two before and then, got killed in a car accident. So then you have the guilt that when I actually showed up for his funeral, I was driving down the street with my dad came down with me, and I'm going down his street, pulling up to his house, and I'm like, I shouldn't be experiencing his neighborhood and his house right now. I'm pulling up to a house and he's not in there. You know what I mean? I had, his parents met me out in the driveway, and obviously lots of hugs and tears, and then took me for a tour of the house and showed me his room, and I could relate to you in feeling the guilt of sitting in the room going, no, I should have experienced this with him by my side, showing me around his new neighborhood. And it's unfortunately a guilt you can't do anything about. You can't change the past. You can just change that you have to accept that this happened for a reason, and ultimately we can't control everyone's actions in the world. All you could do is learn from it and grow from it and try to honor this person and honor the lessons that you've learned from them, and like you mentioned, to pay it forward. And here we are on this podcast, mentioning his name, where that through us they live on forever. You know what I mean? You share those stories with friends and family, and they live on. I mean, Tiffany never even met him, but thinks, feels like she knows him very well because of how much I talk about him. My students here know about him because I relate on the impact that it has. And it's a big thing that death brings to life. It brings a lot of perspective. How did you navigate that after the fact? That's a super tragic thing that you went through. Yet you're still maintaining, school and career after that. So you stayed somewhat on track, but I would imagine it was a challenging time for you.
It was, I would say, probably the toughest thing I've ever dealt with, hands down. I mean, to the point where I'd hate to admit, but where, you get to a point where you think, why am I here?
Right. That's normal.
And, when you get that down about it, I remember in my darkest moments, thinking about my younger brother, thinking about my mother, my family, how would they feel if something like that happened? Mm-hmm. What would be that lasting impact on them? So I always secretly say, like, my younger brother, my mother saved me as much as they've all, maybe I helped them, but they've saved me, because I could not do that to them. I could not give them that level of suffering. And I don't feel like he made people suffer. I just feel like when you feel so bad about something that you have to go away like that, it's a pretty terrible thing to experience.
It's tough. I think there's not a human alive that hasn't experienced some, deep depression at times.
Yeah.
Life's tough. Finances are tough. Raising children, being married, all these things, business, everything's challenging. So to throw your hands up in the air is, I'm sure, a thought that people, have sometimes. And thankfully, you had a strong village of people that are around you that were able to help you through that. And then fast forward again, you had a chance to meet Kristen, who you mentioned helped bring strength and confidence and balance back into your life, and love, and a child's, coming back to where we left off before we took this turn. Children are coming into your life now. You're a new father, now a father of 3, right? You have a son and 2 girls. What's life like for you going from not being a dad at all? You get engaged after 3 months, you get married, you're heavy into your career. Now children are in the mix. At what point does the transition from being a respiratory therapist change and you get more into the corporate side of things while managing a family? I know you then moved out of the town that you met Kristen in. So just kind of let's connect the dots a little bit, because we left a little bit of an opening there from your son Lewis being born forward. So
after Lewis was born, then we had Alyssa, and then we have Vanessa was our 3rd child. So they're our muse. They really is. They motivate us to do the best we can for them. They, I always joke around and say, Kristen was a great athlete. She used to run track. She used to row crew in college. But I said, you didn't run as fast as I did, because she couldn't get away from me. So yeah. we ended up having 3 babies. But, once we started to really develop our family, Kristen started kind of scaling back from nursing, and she had a very great nursing career. So I was always very grateful, but yet I felt somewhat pressured, like, oh my God, here she's worked so hard to get this career. Now her career is shifting, and she's focusing on being a mother and a wife, right? So to help our family. So I felt more pressure to want to do more from a career perspective. I was fortunate enough that in my role in the hospital, I was meeting a lot of people in the industry, a lot of techie people, and I was recruited to a company that pulled me into the industry. And that allowed me to, earn a better living. It was like, when you make a certain amount of money, you want to try to make more money. And then, so these opportunities come and they kind of take you on this scale where you're like, I don't think I could really make that much money, but you actually can. And that's something I always try to tell people, like younger people that I meet that remind me of myself, to say, it's really just taking that leap of faith, like you're going to stumble and that's okay. But that leap of faith will get you there. And so I left the hospital and went into a company that focused on respiratory technology. And then from there, I went to another company focusing on anesthesia technology for like ORs. And I developed a product for them for the U.S. market. They needed someone to kind of launch that product for Canada and for the U.S. And I was that senior product manager to do that. And then eventually I landed in Phillips. That was my first sales role. So I've done marketing, sales, I've done the actual clinical, and it's been a great experience for me because I've seen everything from A to Z in a hospital and all of the aspects of that, from regulatory, FDA, selling product, teaching product. I've kind of done a little bit of everything, so I always feel like I have a good finger on the pulse for what people are asking for, what they need. So,
well, it's like life and experience, just like martial arts. You can't sometimes look at the end of black belt or higher and see people that are that skilled and wonder how you're going to get there. It seems so long and so far away, but little by little you get incremental knowledge and experiences, and each one maybe doesn't get you where you want to be, but gets you a step closer. And similar to your story, you had a goal as a young man to be a surgeon, didn't work out for you, and you enter the field and you're hands-on in the hospital for many years. And little by little, you're working and grinding and pushing and being in that competitive nature and having the motivation to provide for your family to keep climbing up. And each previous experience is giving you the opportunity to grow and to reach a level where you're at now, where you're a regional business manager. If you had a chance to go back to, you as a teenager, knowing what you know now, is there any bits of feedback or advice that you'd pass on to yourself in those moments where you really didn't know where you'd end up in life?
I think, it's interesting when you're in the thick of something that is not the best it can be, right? So you deal with, a parent that's struggling with alcoholism, my mom who's working really hard to kind of try to keep the family together. It's hard for you to see kind of that rainbow at the end, right? Or the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But if I could talk to my younger self, I would just say stay patient, because I would not, who knows what the recipe is, but if I get to live the same life again, I'll do it over again forever, because all of those things created, essentially who I am, good, bad, or indifferent,
right,
and gave me the opportunity to develop skills and critical thinking skills and an understanding in life that maybe I was exposed to things earlier than most people, but that also made me feel like I was prepared for tougher things in life as I got older. So I would just tell myself to be patient and to have faith, and that just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that you haven't gotten to that point yet, but there will be an understanding for that. Just be patient.
Yeah, I've said it a lot before that when you're going through really hard times, the questions that we ask ourselves produce either really good or really bad answers. So if your question is, why am I going through this? Why does bad crap always happen to me? Why is this going on? Yet again, another problem, one thing after another. And then the answers you get back are like, well, poor you, and it's this person, and it's your fault of your financial environment. It's because your dad was an alcoholic. It's because you didn't have money. It's because your friend passed away when you're young and you're depressed about. All these excuses could start to blossom, and you could take you down a very dark path. Or you're still going through the same crap, and you go, what's my lesson here? What am I supposed to learn and get out of this, and I'm going through this for a reason. What am I supposed to gain from it? When you're in the middle of that, it seems almost possible to think about that. But when you look back, you could often say, this experience taught me so many things. At the time, it might have felt like it was never going to end, but here I am now. So you then, hopefully, in future experiences, when things go wrong, you could say, wait a second, I've been in situations like this before where I thought it was the end-all, be-all, but if I stay focused and just say, what's my lesson here? What am I supposed to learn? How can I grow as a man, as a human, as a father, as a husband, and become a better version? Nobody's perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. But when you're able to look in the mirror and man up and say, here, I did this wrong, how could I learn and grow and become the best version of myself? And again, that competitive nature is not just beating everybody else. I think your biggest enemy, your greatest friend, your biggest obstacle is you. Being able to please yourself, to be able to live up to the man that you dream to be. That pressure that we put on ourselves, I think, is greater than what anyone else could say or do for us. And it seems like that's kind of the path that you followed. 17 years into a relationship and 3 children and, a hardworking guy at a top company. How do you manage and balance that all out? Because, another reason I bring you on is that we both work very hard. We're very participatory in our children's lives. We're there at their dance competitions. You're there for your son. You're there for your wife. I could answer the question differently, but for you, how do you maintain? Because I feel like whenever you've made it a certain period of time through life in a relationship as a father, you've been through stuff. You've been through so many ups and downs and roller coasters, and I'm sure you've seen tons of friends around you that didn't survive that and ended up divorced and whatever it may be. It's never easy. People think you meet the right person, and then it's just easy coasting, and that's not it. It's work. Like anything else, business relationship or a personal one, it's hard work, right? It takes both people's commitment and sacrifice. What has been your recipe to balance out being a loving husband, being a father, being a top executive at a company, balancing this all out and still being able to maintain a happy life and time for yourself and all these other goals that you have going on?
Well, it's definitely not something straightforward. I think, it's something you learn over time. I will totally give credit to my wife on allowing me the time to focus on my craft. If it wasn't for her being around and again, she's made major sacrifices in her own personal career, so that, we can balance one another out, right? What is she doing for the family? What am I doing, from a corporate or let's say just a professional perspective? I owe it really all to her because she, we agreed that we were going to try to do this, and I've tried to work as hard as I can so that, we can live a decent life. And balancing it out is, it's like monkeys in a barrel. You ever play that game, monkeys in a barrel? Sometimes, it's, you're clicking and things are working, and sometimes it's really just difficult. But I think the master kind of recipe of it is just to be open and, talk it through and just keep yourselves alert of what's going on and what you need and communicating. And it's hard. I mean, with our girls have a very high dedication to this whole dance competition thing, and they're working hard, they're dedicated, they're spending a lot of time with that. And I know my wife works her tail off to make sure that works for them so that they can feel success, but through hard work, right? They're not getting anything handed to them. So I think it's really just, it sounds cliche, but you got to talk about it. And at times where you're not talking about it, you just got to be ready to get in there and say, listen, what can I do to help? How can I help? How do I fit into what you're already doing? Because I don't want to disrupt anything, but I want to help. The work-life balance, it's something I'm constantly trying to improve on. Because like I told you earlier in the morning, last night I was working on some emails. I started falling asleep at the computer. That's not quality I'm working on, but I'm just trying to get things done. And that's a thing about me that I need to have completion. I need to see something through. And if I don't, you want to drive me crazy, just put me somewhere where we're not going to see something through, and that's not a good fit for me.
That's a good mentality. A lot of people start things that they never finish. And I feel like that's a perfect thing to bring up on not only the secret in martial arts, but the secret of becoming a black belt in life. It's not a secret recipe of, you do A to Z exactly the way that I did it. Your story, my story, our journeys are slightly different, right? But what we have to do is realize that the second that you quit and give up is the day that you start dying. You have to keep grinding and pushing. You have to show up on days that you don't want to, when you're tired, when you're sore, when you want to sleep. The world is going to constantly be throwing obstacles at you. You have to kind of keep, bobbing and weaving and navigating. And it's the consistency, the desire of wanting to see things through, to work with your wife as a partner in life, to try to figure out, all right, sometimes you got to pick up a little bit more of the responsibility. Sometimes it's me. Sometimes it's mutual. There's no secret sauce other than being 100% committed to each other, to your children, to the success of you and your family. And when you have those bad moments, just take a step back and breathe and realize it's a normal part of life, and that if you stay calm and you discuss it in an open and honest way, that it's another thing that you can get past. And I think, again, 17 years in, you've been through so much, you could reflect back and go, hey, hon, look at how much we've been through. We could do this again. Oh, this happened with work, this happened with career. We can get pulled in so many different directions, and life can get really, really bad. But let me tell you something. You injure yourself, you all of a sudden have an appreciation of just being healthy. You lose a good friend or a family member. You take a step back and realize that's a real problem in life. All right, so my boss is being a little bit of a jerk to me today, and this person said that, and this person gave me a finger driving, and these are all the little things that life throws at us that we make a big deal over. But when these big things happen, you realize what's really important in life. And I think the lesson that you're bringing up through our conversation is that it's the consistency of just continuing to not give up, dust off your shoulders when you have some bad moments. And if you could find a partner, a group of friends and people that can help support you, there's days that we need to pick the other person up. There's days that we need to ask for help. And I think that learning process of not giving up and trying to figure out how to navigate this whole world is the recipe. The recipe is just sticking with it, staying positive, and realizing no matter how bad it gets, it does not last forever. Like, one thing I love telling myself a lot when I'm having a really bad or a really long day is, like, at the end of the day, I'm going to be in my bed. You know what I'm saying? There is no forever with this. It will pass. Even the loss of a very dear friend. It's not that you say you get over it, but you learn to cope and deal. Eventually that pain lessens. Eventually the career mistake or whatever it may be goes away and things evolve. So I'm not trying to put words, I'm just trying to reiterate a little bit of what you're saying on, I asked you specifically, how'd you have a successful marriage and how do you do all this? How do you do work-life balance? And you're like, well, step 1, step 2, step 3, that's how a lot of these self-help books and things are written, where I think some people, they hear these conversations and it's like, yeah, well, that works for you, but this is my situation.
I mean, you have to be ready to pivot, right? I mean, you have to be, you're a martial artist. You have this, I've seen you here for how many years is it?
12 years.
12 years. That's awesome. There's a dynamicy to what you teach versus a real life situation, right? The ability for one of your students or yourself, God forbid you're confronted with a situation where we actually have to do what you're an expert at, it's going to be dynamic. But all those things are inherent in you because you've forged it over time. And I believe marriage is that way. You're forging steel over time, and there are days where you have more impurities or more things you have to work out than others, right? Sometimes it's smooth sailing and sometimes it's really rough. Mm-hmm. But it's that journey, it's that dash in between point A and point B that's really defining where you're going to go, and it's going to be a little bit different every day. You and I talk enough that I don't think there's a set recipe. I think you just have to have the willingness to want to get it back to where it can be.
I think also you have to accept at a certain point that all these things have to exist. You can't appreciate a gorgeous day without having experienced a storm. You know what I mean?
Right.
You need perspective. You need that balance, that yin and that yang. Mm-hmm. And I think when these hard moments come in, when you resist them so much,
that's what sits in your chest and is hard to deal with. But when you take a step back and be like, this is life. I'm going to have ups, I'm going to have downs, and just accepting that sometimes there's adversity, sometimes there's failure, there's also sometimes there's success. I mean, there's times you hear the word success you think is just financial, and you meet a friend that's very financially well off, but they would look at you and say, man, I want to have the marriage and the children and the family life you have. And you're like, well, dude, I want your house and your car and your bank account. And you're like, no, that's not. So success is weighed differently. There's been many times that Tiffany and I have been struggling financially, but we take a look at our children being happy and healthy and fed and having a home and having a job and having each other, that we sat back and be like, you know what, maybe we're not rich per se, but we're wealthy. We're wealthy because we have what's really important in life, because if all the stuff is stripped from us, I know if you had your wife and your children with you and you had the ability to provide for them, you're good. That's what it's all about. And I think it's hard in those moments to keep that way of thinking. But I think the more that you could just, in these deep, dark moments, find what you do have to be grateful and thankful for, it doesn't change. It's not like a bunch of hoopla, like, oh, yeah, you just want to be a positive thinker. It's like, listen, you're going through some crap, I get it. Nothing's going to change of what you're going through. But you could either go through it completely stressed out and pissed off and upset and angry, or you can go through it and be grateful for everything that's going well in your life. Nothing's changing what you're going through, but one feels a whole lot better to get you through it than the other one just makes you feel miserable. Why torture yourself? Why going through something so difficult? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As I come here a little bit, towards the end, through your life, through your experience, through work, and, it may be a story, an idea, a quote, whatever it may be. If there's anyone listening, or even, just for yourself to hear your own words, what life advice do you have for someone, whether it's career, family, whatever it may be? What is your lasting thoughts that you want to push out there, right? Your legacy right now, you're being recorded and you're going to have your own podcast right now. So if you have your mantra that you like to push out on what helps to govern you, and you've already mentioned it, but if you could just clarify one more time what you think the lessons that you've learned in life, and if you could pass on advice or feedback to anybody that's listening, what do you have to offer there?
So right before we got married, Chris and I, you have to sit down, and we had a gentleman named Reverend Wilson, and his key phrase, I'll give him credit for this, is "This too shall pass." And that's been my mantra many times in difficult situations, right? And in passing, sometimes Krista and I will say it to each other, and this too shall pass. Whether you want it to or not, you can make a choice to drag something with you and allow it to weigh you down, or, as a 46-year-old man now, looking back at, let's just call it suffering. Any suffering that you have in your life, to me, is a building block. You can go in one direction where you kind of dig yourself into a hole, or you can allow it to go through its process and use it to accelerate positivity and how you help someone else learn from that, or how, like I said earlier, try to pay it forward. But this too shall pass is a big one for me. There's also there's an Asian proverb, and I'm probably going to butcher it, so I apologize. But basically, it's, when you walk through the fires of suffering, at the end of that fire, there's going to be the sweet water of relief. And I know that's not exactly how they say it, but that's how I look at it. That's, to your point, a black belt, you don't get a black belt because you just walk in and pay for a black belt, right? You have to forge it over time. And that's what we do. Our best self is a process. And, like, I look forward to the next years, in my marriage, with my children, seeing them grow up, seeing them achieve, but even seeing them fail, because I know those failures are going to help them learn and adapt and hopefully achieve what they want to do. But that's kind of what I look forward to in life. I'm trying to be better at enjoying what we're doing and how we do, what the product is of our hard work. And it's tough, right? We have young kids. They depend on us to take them everywhere. We don't get as much time with our spouses as we want. So, admittedly, it's hard right now. But I know that at the end of that fire, that sweet water's sitting there waiting. And when I look at my wife and and I see her. I mean, I love her the same. I mean, so much more actually. But I'm in love with her as much as I was the day I realized I was in love with her. You know, and that's what motivates me every day. That, making sure my mother's journey and suffering doesn't go to waste, making sure my father's journey doesn't go to waste, making sure my best friend and anyone else that I've experienced these things with, I'm trying to do things to show like I dedicate this to you. That's the body of work. And hopefully one day, someone will listen to this, or someone will read something I've written or anything like that, and then say, wow, that inspires me. That's what I'm trying to do.
Absolutely. Well, all the decisions that your parents made from the years from, if they never moved out of Puerto Rico, what would your life be like? If you never moved from the Bronx to Keyport, if you never went to Robert Wood Johnson Hospital, it's like each of these decisions lead us down a path. If your friend didn't pass away, how would your life be different? As awful as that is, and I'm sure you'd love to have him right here in front of you, is that something that you had to have in your life to make you the man you are today? And that's, I think, the lasting lesson of how you just put very beautifully, is that you have to accept all of these things that happen to us as part of the process. Don't be so resistant to them. No matter how bad it is, at the end of that fire, there's going to be that forging, that grinding, that pressure, that turns the coal into the diamond. The pressure doesn't feel good, but if you continue to fight through it and persevere, you will come out on the other side much more knowledgeable and experienced. And then the ultimate goal, I think, for us now, the most important job we have in life is being a father, and to teach these young people to grow up to become independent, successful adults on their own is our greatest legacy to them. And it's one of the reasons why I love having you on, because there are some crappy dads that are out there. A lot of times you hear, women always talk about how much work they have to do in raising the kids and all that. And there's people like you and others that I surround myself in life that don't just work hard, but when that job is shut down, now it's like, I'm going to work hard as a father, and now I'm going to work hard as a husband, and I'm going to dive into each of these roles as much as I can to the best of my ability, because that's the type of person that I want to be, and I want to show everyone how much I love them, care for them, and I want to support them and help them to become the best versions of themselves possible. And that's our greatest contribution to the world, is raising our kids. And having on another father that I know that's active, that helps, cooking and cleaning and working and going to dance competitions and putting on pink t-shirts and dancing on stage and,
right.
and doing all the things that we can to make our children happy. It also makes us happy, because it's they live through us. And to me, it's a lesson for the other men and fathers that are out there. Like, you could work hard, I get that, but you don't get to come home at the end of the day and just go, okay, I worked, now take care of me. It's not like that. I think that both people have to be equally contributing to all aspects of life. It's like, oh, that's what women do, that's what men do. Nonsense. It's what we both do. Whoever's got to put the work in. I think that's a success story, is that you're willing to do everything that it takes to make it work, and you can't just coast by. You gotta grind and keep pushing. So I'll put things in show notes, but if someone wants to find you on social media and maybe follow you on Instagram or Facebook or whatever you do, you may not be a big social media guy, but if they want to look you up and follow your life or your career a little bit, where would they find some more information out about you?
So I am on Facebook, just Louis Fuentes on Facebook. I don't use Twitter a lot, but I do. I would just put it out there. Look, if you want to call me directly, 609-694-5459. You're in a situation where you think you have a similarity to what I've been through. I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody about it, because to me, there's, and we didn't have, all the time in the world to talk about all these different people, but there's a lot of people that are involved in that recipe to keep you moving forward. And if I could do that for somebody else, I'd love to do it. So.
Well, I love it, and I'm sure we could talk for another hour about all these different experiences. Doesn't mean you won't be back on again, but I appreciate you being open and candid and sharing part of your story and what life was like for you growing up and climbing this ladder of success to getting to be, at a top level of a major company in the world. and continuing to grind and persevere and do everything that you're doing and setting a great example for the community around you, for your family, for your children. I have no doubt that your best friend, your father, the people that have influenced in your life, your uncle that I know just passed that you're very close with, are all looking at you, extremely proud of the man that you have become and the man you will still continue to become. And it's an honor to not only interview, but it's an honor to be your friend. And I appreciate you coming on the show and talking to me for a little bit, even though there's these weird microphones in the way. It's a lot more fun with just a beer in between. But I'm honored and privileged that you thought it was important enough to come and sit down and chat with me for a few minutes. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I got to tell you, it's we've been talking about this for a while, and it's not easy to talk about yourself. But this was really, really refreshing. I really appreciate the opportunity, and nobody I'd rather do it better with than sit here and talk to you about it. So thank you for the opportunity.
I love it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast with Luis Fuentes. Please feel free to take a look at our show notes and find the links to his social media as well. And please stay tuned for our next Life's Black Belt podcast. As always, thank you for listening. Have a great week.